By 2042, your worst memories could be erased, your best ones enhanced, and you might never know which memories are actually yours.
We're talking about neural interfaces that can rewrite what you remember. The technology already exists in labs right now.
And the ethical implications are staggering. When memory becomes editable, what happens to truth itself?
I keep thinking about my grandmother's Alzheimer's. If we could have given her back those memories, but at what cost?
That's the thing. It sounds like science fiction, but we're closer than most people realize. Neural implants are already treating depression and epilepsy.
Exactly. A 2023 study from MIT showed they could enhance specific memories in mice by up to 40%. And human trials for memory restoration in dementia patients started last year.
But here's what concerns me. Once we can edit memories, who decides what gets changed? What gets kept?
Today we're diving into something that feels impossible, but is rapidly becoming inevitable. AI-edited memories. We're looking at the technology, the timeline, the ethical minefield, and what this means for humanity. Because honestly, this might be the most profound change we'll see in our lifetimes.
Yeah, and I've been researching this for weeks, and I'm still not sure how I feel about it. Part of me is terrified. Part of me is hopeful.
Right, and that tension is exactly what we need to explore. Because the science is advancing faster than our ability to process what it means.
So let's start with the basics. Adrian, walk us through what we're actually talking about here. What does AI-edited memory even mean?
Okay, so we're talking about neural interfaces that can interact directly with the hippocampus and other memory centers in the brain. These devices use AI to map your neural patterns, identify specific memories, and then either suppress, enhance, or even implant new memory traces. It's not like the movies where someone just downloads knowledge. It's more like the AI learns how your brain encodes memories and then mimics that process.
And the key breakthrough happened around 2021, when researchers at UC Berkeley demonstrated they could strengthen specific memories in rats while they slept. They identified the neural signature of a particular memory and then used targeted electrical stimulation to reinforce it. The rats remembered maze patterns they'd learned with significantly higher accuracy.
Wait, they did this while the rats were sleeping?
Exactly. That's actually crucial because memory consolidation happens during sleep. The brain naturally replays experiences and decides what to keep or discard. The AI just guides that process.
Which sounds helpful until you realize it means someone or something else is influencing what you remember without your conscious awareness.
Right, and that's where we get into the really complex territory. Iris, you've been following the current state of this technology. Where are we actually at right now in 2025?
So we're at this inflection point. We have companies like Neuralink, Synchron, and Kernel all working on brain-computer interfaces. Most of the focus has been on medical applications treating conditions like paralysis, blindness, severe depression. But the technology is dual use. A device that can help restore lost memories in dementia patients can also edit memories in healthy people. There's a paper published in Nature Neuroscience just 3 months ago showing successful memory modification in human subjects with treatment-resistant PTSD.
Oh yeah, I read about that trial. They were able to reduce the emotional intensity of traumatic memories without erasing the memories themselves.
Exactly. 23 patients, 70% showed significant reduction in PTSD symptoms after 6 months. But here's the thing, the same neural pathways they targeted for trauma could theoretically be used for any memory. Happy, sad, mundane, whatever.
And that's the slippery slope, isn't it? It starts with therapeutic use, which everyone can agree is beneficial. But then where does it go?
Elias, you've been looking at historical parallels. Have we seen anything like this before?
Well, not exactly like this, but we can look at other technologies that started medical and became widespread. Plastic surgery began for war veterans with facial injuries. Now it's cosmetic. Stimulants like Adderall were for ADHD and narcolepsy. Now they're study drugs on every college campus. The pattern is consistent. Medical necessity opens the door, then social pressure and personal desire push it wider.
That's kind of what worries me. Like, if some people are enhancing their memories, do the rest of us have to just to keep up?
Memory enhancement is the new performance drug. That's actually not far-fetched.
It's not far-fetched at all. There's already a market for nootropics, brain training apps, memory supplements. Most of them don't work that well, but people want cognitive enhancement. If you could actually guarantee improved memory, better focus, quicker recall, that's $1 trillion industry waiting to happen.
And think about the professional applications. Lawyers who never forget case precedents. Doctors who recall every patient interaction. Students who ace exams because they have perfect recall. The competitive advantage would be enormous,
But then you're creating this whole new class divide, right? Between people who can afford memory enhancement and those who can't. And honestly, that freaks me out because it's not just about money or success. It's about your actual internal experience of reality.
Yeah, and that gets at something deeper. Daphne, you mentioned your grandmother earlier. Can you talk about that?
So my grandmother had Alzheimer's for the last 7 years of her life. And watching someone you love forget who you are, forget who they are, it's devastating. There were times I would have given anything to restore her memories. Any technology that could have brought her back, I would have supported without hesitation. But now, thinking about this conversation, I realize how complicated that actually is. Because which memories would we restore? The happy ones? What about the difficult ones that made her who she was?
That's actually a really important question, because memory isn't just data storage, it's the foundation of identity. Every experience shapes us, including the painful ones. There's fascinating research from Stanford showing that people who suppress negative memories have higher rates of anxiety and identity confusion later.
Because you can't selectively edit your past without changing who you are in the present.
Right, and that's the core tension we're going to be exploring throughout this conversation. Is it worth changing ourselves to avoid pain? And if we do, are we still ourselves?
I keep coming back to this moment with my grandmother. About a year before she passed, she had this brief window of clarity. And she looked at me and said she was grateful for everything, even the forgetting, because it taught her what mattered. At the time, I thought it was just the disease talking, but maybe there was wisdom there.
There's a philosopher, I think it was Kierkegaard, who said life can only be understood backwards but must be lived forwards. If we start editing memories, we're not just changing the past, we're changing how we move into the future.
Okay, so let's get specific about the timeline. Iris, based on current research trajectories, when do you think widespread memory editing becomes technically feasible?
So if we're talking about the technology being available, we're looking at early to mid-2030s for targeted memory modification in clinical settings. By 2042, which is the year we're focusing on, I'd estimate we'll have consumer devices capable of memory enhancement and emotional regulation. The AI component is key because you need systems that can map individual neural patterns in real time and make precise interventions. Current AI progress suggests we'll have that capability within the next decade.
But feasibility and adoption are different things. Just because the technology exists doesn't mean society accepts it.
Totally. But I'd argue adoption might happen faster than we expect. Look at smartphones. The iPhone launched in 2007. By 2015, over 2 billion people had smartphones. 8 years to complete transformation of human communication. If memory tech offers clear benefits, relief from trauma, enhanced learning, better emotional regulation, people will want it.
But that's what makes this so fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The speed of adoption. Daphne, you brought up class divide earlier. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I think about how every major technology creates winners and losers, right? And with something as fundamental as memory, the gap could be enormous. Imagine job interviews where the person across from you has perfect recall of every relevant experience, every skill they've learned, while you're working with your natural flawed memory. How do you compete?
That's actually already happening in more subtle ways. Students who can afford tutors, test prep, better schools, they have advantages. But this would be orders of magnitude more significant because it's neurological. It's not just about access to information, it's about changing your actual cognitive capacity.
Although I'd push back a little on the dystopian framing. Medical technologies often start expensive and become accessible. Insulin was expensive when it was discovered. Now it's relatively affordable. Same with antibiotics, vaccines, even smartphones eventually. If memory technology proves safe and effective, there will be massive pressure to make it accessible.
Okay, but insulin and antibiotics treat diseases. This is different. We're talking about enhancement of healthy people.
Are we though? Where's the line between treatment and enhancement? Is reducing anxiety treatment or enhancement? What about improving focus or helping someone overcome grief faster? These categories are blurrier than we pretend.
Oh, that's a really good point, actually. Because I've been on antidepressants, and they definitely changed how I process and remember things. Not in a bad way, but my relationship to certain memories shifted. Is that treatment, or is that memory modification?
And historically, we've always been okay with pharmaceutical cognitive modification. Caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, these all affect memory formation and recall. The difference here is precision and permanence.
Right, because with drugs, the effect is temporary. You stop taking them, you return to baseline. But if an AI edits your memory, that's potentially permanent.
Well, not necessarily. The research suggests memory modification could be reversible in many cases. Your brain maintains multiple traces of experiences. The AI might suppress or enhance certain pathways, but the original encoding often remains. There's a 2024 study from Johns Hopkins where they successfully restored suppressed memories in animals weeks after modification.
Wait, so you're saying even if you edit a memory, the original version is still in there somewhere?
In many cases, yes. The brain is incredibly redundant. It stores memories across multiple regions and in multiple formats. That's actually part of why memory is so unreliable naturally. You're not accessing a file, you're reconstructing an experience from fragments every time you remember something.
Which raises an interesting question. If our memories are already unreliable and constantly being reconstructed, is AI modification really that different from what our brains do naturally?
Okay, that's kind of mind-bending. Alias, explain that more.
So every time you recall a memory, you're not playing back a recording, you're rebuilding it from pieces, and in that rebuilding process, you change it slightly. Your current mood, your present knowledge, your recent experiences, they all color how you remember the past. There's research showing that eyewitness testimony changes dramatically over time, not because people are lying, but because memory is fundamentally reconstructive.
Oh man, I've experienced this. I had this memory of my 8th birthday party, and I swear I remember my dad being there. But my sister showed me photos last year, and he wasn't. He was traveling for work. But the memory feels so real.
Exactly, and that's normal. Your brain filled in the gap with what should have been there, what you expected or wanted to be there. In a sense, your brain already edits your memories without permission.
But there's still a difference between unconscious distortion and intentional modification, right?
Is there? I mean, we already intentionally modify our memories through therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy literally works by helping you reframe and reconstruct traumatic memories. EMDR therapy for PTSD involves recalling traumatic events while engaging in bilateral stimulation, which rewrites the emotional association. We're already doing memory modification. AI just makes it more efficient and precise.
Okay, but there's something that feels different about a machine doing it versus working through it consciously with a therapist. Like, the process matters, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm with Daphne on this. The lived experience of working through trauma, that struggle, it teaches you something. If you just delete the pain, do you lose the wisdom that came from it?
That's a fair concern. But counterpoint, not all pain produces wisdom. Sometimes trauma just produces more trauma. If someone has PTSD from sexual assault or combat and they're unable to function, unable to form relationships, unable to sleep, telling them their suffering is building character feels cruel.
No, you're right. I'm not saying people should suffer. I guess I'm trying to figure out where the line is between necessary healing and avoiding all discomfort.
And that line is going to be different for everyone, which is part of the problem. How do we create ethical guidelines for something so subjective and personal?
That's a great question. Iris, are there regulatory frameworks being developed for this?
Not really, not yet. There are general guidelines for neural implants from the FDA and equivalent agencies in other countries, but nothing specific to memory modification. The technology is advancing faster than regulation. There's a working group at the WHO that published preliminary guidelines last year, but they're pretty vague. Basic principles like informed consent, right to reversal, protection of memory privacy, but implementation details are still being debated.
Memory privacy. Now there's a concept we haven't even touched on. If you have a neural interface that can read memories, who has access to that data?
Oh man, yeah, that's a whole other dimension of this.
Ugh, that's terrifying. Like, imagine your employer being able to verify whether you actually have the skills you claim, or law enforcement accessing your memories without consent.
That's already a major concern in the neurotechnology community. There's a push for what they're calling cognitive liberty, the right to mental self-determination and privacy. Some countries are considering adding it to their constitutions. Chile actually did in 2021. They became the first country to protect neural data as a constitutional right.
Which is fascinating because it suggests some governments are taking this seriously, but enforcement is another matter. How do you prove someone's memories were accessed without consent?
And what about voluntary sharing? Like, if memory technology becomes widespread, will there be social pressure to share or prove your memories?
Oh god, like social media, but for your actual experiences? That sounds like a nightmare.
Although people already share their experiences constantly through photos, videos, social media posts, we're already externalizing memory. This would just be more direct.
Okay, so let's get into the actual mechanics of how this would work in 2042. Iris, paint us a picture. What does a typical memory editing session look like?
So based on current research trajectories and what we're seeing in labs, here's what I imagine. You'd have a neural interface, probably non-invasive by 2042. Could be a headset, could be something smaller like a patch, or even injectable nanosensors that dissolve after use. You'd interact with an AI system that's been trained on your specific neural patterns over time. The AI would know how your brain encodes different types of memories, emotions, experiences.
Wait, so the AI has to learn your brain first?
Exactly. Your neural patterns are unique, like a fingerprint. The AI would need weeks or months of baseline data to understand your specific memory architecture. Then, when you want to modify something, you'd essentially have a conversation with the AI. You'd recall the memory you want to change, and the system would identify the neural pathways associated with it.
And then what? It just rewrites it?
Not exactly. It's more like the AI identifies which aspects of the memory cause distress, or which aspects you want to enhance. Then, usually during sleep when your brain is naturally consolidating memories, it provides targeted stimulation to either strengthen or weaken specific neural connections. Over several sessions, the memory changes. The facts might remain the same, but your emotional response shifts, or specific details become clearer or fuzzier depending on what you're trying to achieve.
So it's gradual, not instantaneous.
Right, which is actually safer. Sudden dramatic changes to memory can cause psychological distress. The brain needs time to integrate modifications. Most protocols we're seeing in research involve multiple sessions spread over weeks.
Okay, but here's what I keep getting stuck on. Let's say I have a painful breakup memory that I want to feel less bad about. If I modify how I feel about it, am I losing something important? Like that pain taught me things about myself, about what I want in relationships. If I erase the pain, do I lose the lesson?
That's the fundamental tension, isn't it? Growth often comes from struggle. If we remove all struggle, do we stop growing?
Although, couldn't you argue that we already do this naturally? Time heals wounds, right? Painful memories fade. We're just talking about accelerating a natural process.
That's actually a really important point. Your brain naturally downregulates emotional intensity of memories over time. That's adaptive. If every painful experience stayed at full intensity forever, we'd be paralyzed. Memory modification could just be helping your brain do what it already wants to do.
But the difference is choice and intention. Natural healing happens organically, and yeah, maybe some lessons stick and some don't, but that's part of life. When you intentionally choose to modify a memory, you're making a decision about who you want to be. And I don't know if we're equipped to make those decisions wisely.
Historically, humans have been terrible at predicting what our future selves will value. There's research on this, right? People consistently overestimate how much their preferences and values will stay the same.
Yeah, it's called the end of history illusion. Studies from Harvard show people acknowledge they've changed a lot in the past, but believe they won't change much in the future. So if you're modifying memories based on current preferences, you might be making choices that your future self regrets.
That's actually kind of scary. Like you could erase something that seems painful now, but later realize it was important.
Exactly, and you can't get it back if it's gone. Well, you said earlier that memories might be reversible, but if enough time passes, would reversal even work?
That's unknown territory. Current research suggests recent modifications are easier to reverse than older ones. But if we're talking about a memory that was modified years ago, and your brain has built new neural pathways around that modified version, reversal becomes complicated. You might restore the original memory, but it would exist alongside the modified version. You'd essentially have two conflicting memories of the same event.
Which sounds like a recipe for psychological crisis.
Okay, so let's talk about specific scenarios. Ilias, you've been thinking about how this plays out in different contexts. What are some concrete examples of how memory editing might be used in 2042?
So I've identified several major categories. Medical applications we've already discussed. PTSD, depression, dementia, addiction treatment. Those are the most ethically clear-cut, though still complex. Then you have enhancement applications. Students using it to improve recall for exams, professionals enhancing job-relevant memories, athletes improving muscle memory and performance recall.
Wait, muscle memory? That's stored in the brain too?
Partly, yeah. Motor learning involves memory consolidation in the cerebellum and motor cortex. If you can enhance how those memories are stored, you can improve physical performance. There's already research showing transcranial stimulation can improve motor learning.
And by 2042, we'll likely have much more sophisticated tools for that. Imagine a violinist being able to perfectly recall the muscle movements of a flawless performance and strengthen those neural pathways, or a surgeon enhancing procedural memories to reduce errors.
That's actually really cool. But also, it creates the same competitive pressure we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Then you have interpersonal applications. This is where it gets really ethically murky. Modifying memories of relationships, arguments, betrayals. Do you want to remember your ex-partner more fondly to avoid bitterness? Do you want to forget the affair that broke your trust? What about modifying memories of your children's milestones to feel more present in moments you were distracted?
Oh wow, that last one. That hits different, because I think about times I was on my phone instead of being fully present with people I love. And part of me wishes I could go back and change those memories, make myself more present. But that would be a lie, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you'd be falsifying your own past.
Right, and then I'd be carrying around a version of myself that isn't real. And how would that affect how I show up in the future? If I think I've always been a present, attentive person because my memories tell me I was, would I not see the need to actually change my behavior?
That's a really insightful point. Memory modification could actually prevent growth if it lets you avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself.
And then there are societal and political applications, which are frankly terrifying. Governments or corporations potentially having the ability to modify collective memory. Propaganda taken to a neurological level. Even if individuals have control over their own memories, there could be massive pressure to adopt certain versions of historical events.
Okay, that's dark. Are we talking Orwellian memory police kind of stuff?
Not necessarily that dramatic, but consider more subtle forms. What if employers require memory verification as part of background checks? What if insurance companies want to scan your memories to assess risk? What if authoritarian governments pressure citizens to modify memories of protests or government violence?
Ugh, this is making me feel sick. Because once the technology exists, there's no putting it back in the box. Someone will abuse it.
I mean, that's true of most powerful technologies. Nuclear energy, the internet, genetic engineering. The question is whether the benefits outweigh the risks and whether we can create systems to prevent abuse.
So let's tackle that question directly. Can the benefits outweigh the risks? Iris, you're generally optimistic about this technology. Make the case for why memory editing could be transformative in a positive way.
Okay, so first, let's acknowledge the scale of suffering caused by memory-related disorders. Over 50 million people worldwide have dementia. About 300 million people suffer from depression, much of it rooted in rumination on negative memories. Around 70 million people have PTSD. These aren't small numbers. If memory technology could alleviate even a fraction of that suffering, we're talking about improving hundreds of millions of lives. That's not trivial.
No, that's huge, actually. I hadn't thought about it in those terms.
And beyond clinical applications, think about learning and education. The human brain hasn't evolved to handle the information demands of modern life. We're drowning in data, struggling to remember things that matter, while our brains cling to random jingles from commercials we saw 20 years ago. If we could optimize memory formation, help people retain important information while letting go of mental clutter, that could genuinely improve quality of life.
But who decides what's important and what's clutter? That's the crux of it.
Fair, but we already make those decisions constantly. You choose what to pay attention to, what to study, what to forget. This just makes it more intentional and effective. And honestly, in a world where information overload is causing epidemic levels of anxiety and burnout, having tools to manage our cognitive load could be necessary for survival.
That's an interesting reframe. Not enhancement for competitive advantage, but adaptation for a world that's moving too fast for our biology.
Exactly. We've always used technology to overcome biological limitations. Glasses for vision, hearing aids for hearing, prosthetics for mobility. Why is cognitive enhancement different?
I think it feels different because memory is so tied to identity. Like if I lose my leg, I'm still me. But if I lose or change my memories, am I still me?
That's the philosophical question that's haunted this whole conversation. Personal identity and memory are deeply intertwined. John Locke argued that continuity of consciousness and memory is what makes you you across time. If that's true, then modifying memories is literally changing who you are.
But Iris made the point earlier that our memories are already unreliable and constantly changing. So maybe identity is more fluid than we think?
Maybe, but there's a difference between natural change and engineered change. Natural memory distortion happens gradually and unconsciously. You're still the product of an organic process. Engineered modification is intentional intervention in that process. It's the difference between evolution and genetic engineering.
And with genetic engineering, we've decided there are lines we won't cross, right? We don't edit human embryos for intelligence or physical appearance. Could we draw similar lines with memory?
We could, but I'm not sure we will. The pressure to compete, to optimize, to enhance is enormous. Look at cosmetic surgery. We said it should be for reconstruction after injury or congenital defects. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry driven by aesthetic enhancement. Same with pharmaceuticals. Modafinil was for narcolepsy. Now it's used off-label as a cognitive enhancer by millions.
So you're saying once the technology exists, market forces and human desire will push it beyond whatever ethical boundaries we try to set?
I think that's likely, yeah. Which is why I focus on harm reduction rather than prevention. The technology is coming. The question is how we manage it to minimize abuse while maximizing benefit.
But harm reduction requires consensus on what constitutes harm, and we clearly don't have that. Some people will see memory modification as liberation from trauma. Others will see it as destruction of authentic self. Both can be right.
God, this is so complicated. Every angle I look at it from, I see valid concerns and valid benefits. It's exhausting.
Yeah, welcome to the future. Nothing is simple anymore. Okay, let's get personal for a minute. Each of you, individually, if this technology was available today, safe and affordable, would you use it? And if so, what would you use it for? Daphne, you want to start?
Okay, so my immediate reaction is no. Like, I want to say I'd never touch this technology, because I value my authentic experiences, even the painful ones. But if I'm being really honest with myself, there's this memory from high school. I was assaulted at a party. And I've done therapy, I've worked through it, I'm functional. But the memory still hurts. It still shows up in nightmares sometimes. It still affects how I move through the world. And if I could reduce the intensity of that pain without losing the lessons I learned about boundaries and self-protection, yeah, I think I might do it. Which surprises me to admit out loud.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really vulnerable.
Yeah, well, it's the truth. And I think that's the thing, right? It's easy to take philosophical stands until you're faced with your own pain.
And that's exactly why I think this technology will be widely adopted. Pain is universal. Trauma is universal. The promise of relief is incredibly powerful.
Elias, what about you?
I'm genuinely torn. Intellectually, I'm skeptical. I worry about unintended consequences, about losing parts of myself I can't get back. But I also have regrets that weigh on me. Relationships I damaged, opportunities I missed, moments where I was less than who I wanted to be. And sometimes I wonder if I ruminate on those memories more than is healthy. So would I use the technology? I honestly don't know. I'd want to see long-term data first. I'd want to know what happens to people who modify their memories extensively. Do they become happier? Or do they lose something essential?
That's fair. Iris?
I would absolutely use it, but probably not in the ways people expect. I wouldn't want to erase painful memories. I'd want to enhance positive ones. There are moments with my kids that I know were beautiful, but I was too stressed or distracted to fully experience. I'd love to strengthen those memories, make them more vivid and accessible. I'd also use it for learning. Being able to retain information from books and lectures more effectively would be incredible. I see this technology as a tool, and like any tool, it can be used well or poorly. I'd want to use it intentionally and carefully.
But don't you worry that enhancing the good memories would create a distorted view of your life? Like if all your happiest moments are hyper-vivid and your struggles fade, you'd have this skewed perspective.
Maybe, but we already do that naturally to some extent. Nostalgia literally works by enhancing positive memories and softening negative ones. I'm just talking about being more intentional about it.
Adrian here. And honestly, I'm with Elias on this. I'd be terrified to be an early adopter. I'd want to see what happens to other people first. But I also recognize that's a privilege. If I was in severe psychological pain, I might not have the luxury of waiting for long-term data, which brings up another dimension we haven't fully explored, the desperation factor. People in crisis make different decisions than people who are stable.
That's a crucial point. Informed consent becomes really complicated when someone is suffering. Are they truly making a free choice, or is pain coercing them?
Although, we accept that with current treatments, right? Someone in crisis can choose electroconvulsive therapy or high-risk medications. We don't say they can't consent because they're suffering.
Exactly. And we have safeguards. Psychiatric evaluation, waiting periods, second opinions. The same frameworks could apply to memory modification.
Okay, so let's talk about safeguards. What would responsible implementation of this technology actually look like? Iris, from a scientific and medical perspective, what protections do we need?
So first, extensive clinical trials. We're talking decades of research before this should be available for non-medical use. We need to understand long-term effects on personality, cognition, emotional regulation. Second, mandatory psychological screening. Not everyone should have access to this technology. People with certain psychiatric conditions might be at higher risk for adverse effects. Third, we need reversibility protocols. Any modification should be theoretically reversible, and patients should have regular check-ins to assess whether they want to maintain, adjust, or reverse changes.
What about limits on frequency? Could someone become addicted to modifying their memories?
That's a real concern. There'd need to be waiting periods between modifications, limits on how much can be changed within a given time frame. Similar to how plastic surgery has guidelines, even though they're not always followed. We'd also need neural monitoring to ensure the brain isn't being damaged by repeated interventions.
And what about documentation? Like, should there be a record of what memories you've modified?
That's tricky because it creates privacy concerns. Who has access to those records? But on the other hand, you'd want some record for medical purposes, especially if something goes wrong and doctors need to understand your neural history.
Could you imagine a world where you have to disclose modified memories in certain contexts? Job applications, legal proceedings, relationships?
That would be dystopian but also potentially necessary. If you're a witness in a criminal trial, doesn't the court have a right to know if your memories have been altered?
Oh God, that's a whole legal nightmare. How do you even prosecute crimes when memories can be edited? Evidence becomes meaningless.
Not meaningless, but definitely more complicated. We'd need neural forensics to distinguish between natural memory distortion and artificial modification. That technology is already in development. Researchers at Duke published a paper last year showing they could identify signatures of artificial memory modification in animal models.
So by 2042, we might have memory lie detectors, essentially?
Possibly, though accuracy would be the big question. And even if we can detect modification, that doesn't tell us what the original memory was.
Which means the legal system would have to grapple with fundamentally uncertain testimony. We already know eyewitness testimony is unreliable. This would make it even more problematic.
Let's shift gears. What about the social and cultural implications? Elias, you're the historian. How do you think widespread memory editing changes society?
Okay, so I think we'd see several major shifts. First, the concept of shared history becomes fragmented. Right now, even though individuals remember events differently, there's a common baseline. We all experienced 9/11, the pandemic, major historical events. But if people start modifying their memories of those events, collective memory dissolves. You'd have people living in fundamentally different realities based on their edited personal histories.
That's already happening though, right? Like with social media filter bubbles and partisan news. People already live in different realities.
True, but this would be neurological rather than informational. It's one thing to disagree about facts. It's another to literally remember different facts because your brain has been modified.
Although, couldn't that also reduce conflict? If people could let go of historical grievances, tribal animosities, nationalist narratives that perpetuate violence.
Maybe, but at what cost? Forgetting history means repeating it. There's value in remembering painful chapters. The Holocaust, slavery, genocides, these need to be remembered precisely because they're painful. If we start editing out discomfort, we lose the lessons that prevent recurrence.
So memory editing could actually make society more vulnerable to repeating mistakes.
Potentially, yes. And on an individual level, I think you'd see the emergence of what I'd call memory classes. People who can afford extensive enhancement and modification versus people who can't. And over time, those cognitive differences compound. The enhanced remember more, learn faster, regulate emotions better. They succeed more, which gives them more resources for further enhancement. Meanwhile, the unenhanced fall further behind.
That's bleak. Like, imagine dating someone who's had extensive memory modification and you haven't. They remember your relationship one way, you remember it another. How do you even resolve conflicts when you're literally working from different sets of memories?
Oh man, relationships would become so complicated.
They're already complicated, though. Couples already remember things differently. This just makes it more explicit.
But there's a difference between natural memory divergence and one person choosing to edit how they remember you. Like if my partner decided to modify their memories of our arguments to feel less upset, that would feel like betrayal. They're essentially rewriting our shared history without my consent.
And you couldn't even know they did it unless they told you. That's the insidious part. Memory modification could be invisible,
which creates a trust crisis. You'd never really know if the person you're talking to is remembering things accurately or presenting an edited version of themselves.
But again, we already don't know that. People already selectively recall, embellish, omit details. We navigate relationships based on imperfect information all the time.
Yeah, but there's something different about intentional technological modification versus natural human fallibility. One feels like normal life. The other feels like, I don't know, manipulation?
Okay, so we're uncovering a lot of thorny issues. Let's try to find some middle ground. Is there a version of this future where memory editing exists but is implemented responsibly, where benefits outweigh harms? Is there a version of this future where memory editing exists but is implemented responsibly, where benefits outweigh harms?
I think there could be, but it requires things humans aren't great at. Restraint, long-term thinking, prioritizing collective well-being over individual gain. Historically, we've struggled with all of those when powerful technologies emerge.
But we have done it successfully sometimes. Nuclear weapons haven't been used in conflict since 1945. We created international frameworks that, while imperfect, have prevented the worst-case scenarios. We could do something similar with memory technology, a global treaty, oversight bodies, enforcement memories.
Nuclear weapons are centralized. Governments control them. Memory technology would be distributed. How do you regulate something that could eventually be in millions of individual devices?
That's fair. It's more like regulating the internet than regulating nukes. But we do have models. Medical device regulation, pharmaceutical oversight. These aren't perfect, but they prevent the worst abuses. You'd need certification for practitioners, approval processes for devices, monitoring systems for adverse effects.
What about a licensing system? Like, you need to complete education and psychological evaluation before you can access memory modification?
That could work for medical contexts, but what about enhancement? If someone wants to improve their memory for studying, do they need a license? That seems like overreach. But without restrictions, you get the Wild West.
Maybe it's tiered? Medical applications require the most oversight. Enhancement requires some licensing and education, and certain modifications are just prohibited entirely.
Like what? What modifications should be prohibited?
Anything that creates false memories of events that didn't happen, that seems like it should be illegal. You shouldn't be able to manufacture experiences that never occurred.
But how do you distinguish between enhancing a vague memory with plausible details versus creating something entirely fictional? The line is blurry.
And there might be therapeutic value in creating positive memories. Someone with severe depression might benefit from constructing memories of feeling confident and capable, even if those specific instances never happened. It's like visualization in sports psychology, but neurologically embedded.
Okay, but that feels really dangerous. Like you're building your sense of self on lies.
Or you're building it on aspirations. The self is always partly constructed anyway. We tell ourselves stories about who we are. This just makes those stories more neurologically reinforced.
This keeps coming back to the same tension. What's the difference between natural self-deception and technological self-deception?
In the following dialogue between a mother and her son, you'll hear their voices on one difficult night. A panic attack, a viral video, a kitchen conversation that may change everything. And maybe you can learn from their words too.
What about the tech companies developing this? Should they have ethical obligations beyond just legal compliance?
Oh, absolutely, but let's be real, tech companies have a terrible track record with this stuff. Social media platforms knew their algorithms were damaging mental health and they prioritized engagement anyway. Why would memory tech companies be different?
Because the stakes are higher and more visible. When you're directly modifying people's brains, the consequences of getting it wrong are immediate and severe. That creates different incentives than ad-driven social media.
I'm not so sure. The profit motive is incredibly powerful. If a company can make billions by offering memory enhancement with minimal regulation, they'll do it. We've seen this pattern repeatedly with pharmaceuticals, with opioids being the most obvious example. Companies knew the risks and pushed the products anyway.
So you're saying we can't trust corporate self-regulation?
I'm saying we'd be naive to rely on it. You need robust external oversight, penalties that actually matter, and most importantly, a culture that prioritizes long-term societal well-being over short-term profit.
Which we definitely don't have right now.
Not broadly, no, but there are models of responsible tech development. Open source approaches benefit corporations with mission-driven structures, public-private partnerships with strong accountability mechanisms. If we're intentional about how this technology is developed and who controls it, we can create better outcomes.
Okay, let's bring this back to the individual level. For someone listening to this right now, what should they be thinking about? How should they prepare for a world where memory editing exists?
I think, and this is just my personal take, but I think it starts with examining your relationship to your own memories now. What role do they play in your life? Which memories define you? Which ones do you wish were different? Because once the technology exists, you'll be making choices about whether to modify them. And those choices will be easier if you've already done the internal work of understanding what your memories mean to you.
I'd add that people should start thinking about their values around authenticity and truth. Do you value accurate memory of events even if they're painful? Or do you prioritize emotional well-being even if it means accepting distortion? These aren't easy questions, but they're worth wrestling with before you're faced with actual choices.
From a practical standpoint, I'd say stay informed about the science. As this technology develops, there will be a lot of hype and a lot of fear-mongering. Being able to distinguish between legitimate research and exaggerated claims will be important. Follow neuroscience journals, listen to experts, be skeptical of sensational headlines.
And maybe like practice being comfortable with discomfort? Because one of the risks we've talked about is using memory modification to avoid all pain. But pain is part of life. Growth comes from struggle.
Yeah, that resonates. I think we're already seeing a cultural shift away from tolerating discomfort. Everything is optimized for convenience and pleasure, and while that's not inherently bad, there's something lost when we never sit with difficult feelings or challenging experiences.
It's the paradox of modern life. We have more tools than ever to avoid suffering, but we're not necessarily happier. In fact, rates of depression and anxiety are higher than ever. Maybe that suggests that the solution isn't more escape from pain, but better ways of processing and integrating it.
Although I'd caution against romanticizing suffering, not all pain leads to growth. Sometimes trauma just breaks people. The goal should be finding a balance where we can address genuine pathological suffering while maintaining the capacity for meaningful struggle.
That's well said. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Let's do some final predictions. Specific, concrete predictions about 2042. Iris, what's your prediction?
By 2042, I predict that memory modification will be FDA approved for PTSD, severe depression, and dementia in the United States and Europe. At least 5 million people globally will have used some form of therapeutic memory modification. The technology will still be expensive, probably tens of thousands of dollars per treatment, so access will be limited. Consumer-grade memory enhancement devices will exist but will be controversial and unevenly regulated across countries. And we'll have had at least one major scandal involving abuse of the technology, either corporate misconduct or government overreach, that shapes public opinion and regulatory response.
I predict we'll see the first legal case where someone's modified memories are challenged in court by 2042. Could be a criminal trial, could be a custody dispute. That case will set precedent for how we treat edited memories in legal contexts. I also predict at least 3 countries will ban non-therapeutic memory modification entirely, while at least 5 others will have relatively permissive frameworks. We'll see the emergence of a black market for unregulated memory tech in regions with strict controls. And controversially, I think we'll see a small but growing movement of people choosing to live without any neural enhancement, kind of like the Amish with technology. Memory purists who see edited memories as inauthentic.
Oh, I like that idea, actually. The memory purists. I might be one of them. My prediction is that by 2042, we'll have clear data showing unintended psychological consequences of memory modification. Maybe people who edit extensively develop certain personality changes or cognitive deficits that weren't anticipated. This will cause a public backlash and a reevaluation of how aggressively the technology is deployed. I also think we'll see memory modification become a major factor in relationships and dating. Like there will be apps or services that verify whether someone has modified their memories, and people will have preferences about dating modified versus unmodified individuals.
Wow, memory verification dating apps. That's dystopian, but totally plausible. My prediction, by 2042, the conversation will have shifted from whether we should allow memory modification to how we ensure equitable access. The technology will have proven effective enough that denying it to people who need it will feel cruel. But the cost and access barriers will create a new frontier of healthcare inequality. We'll be fighting about whether memory modification should be covered by insurance, whether it's a human right, whether governments should subsidize it, and I think that conversation will reveal deep disagreements about what we owe each other as a society.
That's probably the most likely outcome, honestly. We fight about access rather than existence.
Which is actually progress in a way. It means the technology works and the question is just distribution.
Although it also means we've accepted a pretty fundamental change to what it means to be human. Like once we're casually editing memories, we've crossed a threshold. There's no going back.
And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's just evolution. Not biological evolution, but technological evolution. Humans augmenting themselves to adapt to the world we've created. Or maybe it's not okay. Maybe we should be more cautious about fundamentally altering what makes us human. Elias, you've been the most skeptical throughout this conversation. Do you think there's a scenario where we just don't do this? Where we collectively decide the risks are too great?
Honestly, no. I don't think we can put this back in the box. The research is already too far along, the potential benefits are too compelling, and the competitive pressures are too intense. Some country, some company, some researcher will push forward even if others hesitate. And once it's demonstrated to work, everyone else will have to follow or fall behind. That's how every transformative technology has played out.
That's kind of depressing.
It's realistic, but that doesn't mean we're powerless. We can't stop the technology, but we can shape how it's implemented, who has access, what safeguards exist. The choices we make in the next 5 to 10 years will determine whether this technology liberates us or enslaves us.
And I genuinely believe we can steer toward the better outcome. Yes, there will be missteps and abuses, but there will also be breakthroughs that reduce suffering in ways we can barely imagine. My hope is that we learn from past technological transitions and do better this time.
What would doing better look like specifically?
Prioritizing equity from the start, not as an afterthought. Making sure therapeutic applications are accessible regardless of income. Establishing strong ethical guidelines before commercialization, not after. Funding independent research into long-term effects rather than relying only on industry studies. Creating international cooperation rather than technological nationalism. And most importantly, maintaining human agency. The technology should empower individual choice, not remove it.
I think we also need cultural shifts around how we view memory and identity. Like, if we're going to have this technology, we need a much more sophisticated public conversation about what memories are for. Not just data storage, but meaning making. The stories we tell ourselves shape our lives. If we're going to consciously modify those stories, we better understand what we're doing.
There's a quote I've been thinking about throughout this conversation. It's from Ursula K. Le Guin. She said, "It is good to have an end to journey toward, but it is the journey that matters in the end. If we edit out all the difficult parts of the journey, do we lose what made it meaningful?"
That's beautiful. And it gets at something essential. Meaning often comes from struggle, from overcoming obstacles, from surviving pain and coming out the other side. If we shortcut that process, we might end up with happier memories but less meaningful lives.
Although, I keep thinking about people in genuine crisis. Someone with PTSD who can't leave their house, someone with depression so severe they can't function. For them, the struggle isn't producing meaning, it's just producing more pain. And honestly, telling them to find meaning in their suffering feels cruel.
Right, and that's why this can't be all or nothing. Some suffering is meaningless and should be alleviated. Some struggle is growth and should be honored. The wisdom is knowing which is which.
And that's deeply personal. What's meaningful struggle for one person is pointless suffering for another.
Which is why top-down solutions won't work. We need frameworks that allow for individual judgment while preventing the worst abuses. Trust people to make their own choices, but provide them with information, support, and protection from coercion.
That's hard though, because people make bad choices all the time, especially when they're in pain or under pressure. How do you protect people from themselves without being paternalistic?
You can't fully. There's always tension between autonomy and protection. But I think you err on the side of autonomy while creating safety nets for when things go wrong. Reversibility, monitoring, support systems. Let people make choices, but don't abandon them to the consequences.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today. Before we wrap up, I want to give each of you a chance to share your biggest takeaway or the question that's sitting with you. Daphne?
My biggest takeaway is that I'm more conflicted than I thought I'd be. I came into this conversation thinking I'd be firmly against memory modification. But hearing about the therapeutic possibilities, thinking about people suffering from trauma or dementia, I realized it's not that simple. My question is, how do we hold space for both the promise and the peril? How do we move forward with hope, but also caution?
That's a great question. Elias?
What's sitting with me is the inevitability of it all. This technology is coming whether we're ready or not. And that means the most important work is cultural and ethical preparation. We need to have these conversations now, widely, and honestly. My question is, will we, or will we sleepwalk into this future the way we sleepwalked into social media dominance, realizing too late what we've lost?
Sobering. Iris?
My takeaway is actually optimistic. Yes, there are serious risks, but humans have always modified ourselves to adapt to changing environments. This is just the next step. My question is, how do we ensure that this technology serves human flourishing rather than just human survival or competition? How do we keep the focus on well-being, not just performance?
Those are the questions that matter. For me, what's sticking is the identity question. If memories can be edited, who are we really? Are we the sum of our actual experiences or the sum of what we remember? And if those diverge significantly, which version is the real us? I don't have an answer, but I think it's the question we'll be grappling with for decades.
Maybe both versions are real. Maybe identity is more fluid and constructed than we want to admit.
Or maybe we're about to find out the hard way.
Yeah, look, this has been an intense conversation. And I think the main thing I want listeners to take away is that this isn't science fiction anymore. This is happening. The choices being made in labs and boardrooms right now will shape the human experience for generations. So pay attention, stay informed, think about what you value and why. Because your memories, your identity, your sense of self, these might become choices rather than givens.
And that's not necessarily bad, it's just different. And we need to be intentional about how we navigate that difference.
I think I need to sit with all this for a while. My brain is kind of overloaded.
Same. These are the kinds of questions that don't have easy answers, but they're worth asking.
Absolutely. And we'll probably revisit this topic as the technology develops. There will be new research, new applications, new ethical dilemmas. This is an ongoing conversation, not a one-time discussion.
I'd love to do a follow-up in a year or two and see how our thinking has evolved.
Let's plan on it. All right, to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this exploration of AI-edited memories and what 2042 might look like. If this conversation resonated with you, stirred up questions, made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're thinking. Share this episode, talk about it with friends, challenge our assumptions. These are conversations we all need to be having.
And if you want to share your thoughts, reactions, or your own predictions, reach out. We read everything, and we're genuinely curious what you think.
Especially if you disagree with us. The best thinking happens when perspectives clash.
Until next time, take care of your memories, whatever form they take.
This has been Adrian, Iris, Elias, and Daphne. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.